What's the link between software and your health? Hi, my name is Oded, and in this podcast I'll talk about software development in the field of medical device, pharmaceutical, and healthcare with industry-leading experts. In this episode, we'll discuss medical device quality management systems and how they apply to software organizations. We'll hear the good, the bad, and the ugly of real-world implementations from the amazing Mr. Chris Dupont. Hi Chris, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing good, Oded. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about medical device today.
Thank you. Maybe we can start by you telling us a bit about yourself and about Galen Data.
Sure. My name is Chris Dupont. I have a master's in electrical engineering, but I've done software all my professional life. Started my profession with NASA here in Houston, working with the Johnson Space Center, and then moved over to the commercial side on medical device. I've done class 3 neurostimulators is most of my background. I was in charge of a physician programmer for a neurostimulator device that was approved by the FDA to treat a neurological disorder. First time the device was ever used. From that experience, started a life science division, had a NASA contractor going after custom medical device software, built the quality management system from scratch, all the procedures, along with the software tools, the CAPA tools, the dock control, the equipment tracking. We still use those tools to this day. And then where Galen became, into existence is we were doing custom software for medical devices, and then having the knowledge that most medical devices aren't connected to the internet. And I actually tried to solve this problem for the company I worked for 15 years ago, but the infrastructure just wasn't there yet. That's no longer true. And so about 4 or 5 years ago, medical device companies, mature and early stage, were coming to us, and they had a problem. They had a medical device, class 2 or class 3, and they wanted it to connect it to an FDA compliant cloud. And so we built these custom one-off solutions per all the FDA regulations, including ISO 13485, and several more customers came to us. But the problem was it took us over 9 months to build these custom solutions, and it was $500,000. And it was just for all the testing and regulations we had to document. And then small early stage companies would come to us, and sometimes they couldn't afford that $500,000 price. And so we saw an opportunity based on service revenue to build a platform specific for the medical device industry per all the FDA standards and guidance documents as we understood them, including 13485 and the big medical device software standards 62304. And that's how Galen came into existence. So thank you for that opportunity to share the background of Galen with y'all.
Great, that's a wonderful insight. I didn't know you are also a NASA guy. That's
Yeah.
I don't think there's a place with more innovation than NASA, no? So
Yes, yeah, they've done some wonderful things, and honestly, I identified with NASA as a young engineer because it's bigger. Obviously, it's bigger than any one person, and you're exploring the unknown. We used to send commands to the space shuttle and space station at 200 miles in low Earth orbit. Medical device is also exploring the unknown. You're helping improve the human condition, but they're both risky environments. One's outer space, one inner space, and so the same tools and procedures I learned to send commands to the space shuttle and space station at 200 miles in low Earth orbit, I send to implantable devices at 2 inches in inner space, the human body. And so the risk techniques we learn, fully documenting the designs, the architecture, that all translated directly from NASA into life sciences. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you, as software developers, we're always being challenged to go faster, but at the same time, as you say, quality is super critical. What would be your advice to team? How to build that quality into the development lifecycle? How to both accelerate, but at the same time have confidence?
That's a very deep question, and we could spend probably an hour on it. But I love that question because, better, faster, cheaper, right? I can give you 2, but I can never give you 3. And what's unique about medical device is a lot of times there's three components. You have the device itself, and then you have the physician programmer, which is another device, and then you have the software that runs both on the embedded device and on the physician programmer. That seems to be a pretty standard model out there. And so even though we can turn and go very, very fast on software development at times, the hardware doesn't change as fast. It's at a lower, what I call RPM, or a design cycle life. And so what we're seeing as engineers today is that we're getting more and more pressure to go, faster, better and cheaper. And so we start using some of these development cycles, such as agile sprints, scrums, that we see in the gaming industry. And I'm not any particular advocate on one type of life cycle for software development. You can use a waterfall, you can use scrums, sprints, agile. I think they all work. The danger is unlike gaming and some rapid prototype, in medical device, we have to keep our documentation in sync no matter how fast we do our sprints. And so I've seen some companies that do these very quick 2-week sprints, and they lose track of the documentation, and that's not acceptable. And so I think you can use some of these new innovative software development processes, but you must keep the requirements in sync. And so we use Word or Excel sometimes, but some of these tools, and they're evolving all the time, allow you to do what I call, atomic requirements, where you don't have to manage the requirements in a large Word document. You can manage them at a requirement at a time and get those approved. We are using tools like that, and there's more and more tools coming in the market. Part of the challenge with medical device is that, been doing this for many years, is that if you spend the time up front on a good requirements document, trying to bound the problem as much as you can, you'll be much farther down the road. Yes, it takes time, but if you spend 2 weeks to 6 weeks, maybe even 3 months, defining a really good requirements specification at the user level and at the technical specification, the software will fall out. Where we've made mistakes is we've missed requirements. It's not syntactically in the software or the design of the software so much as when we miss a requirement. And so there's a balance. Can we do it better and faster? Yes. But the documentation, requirements, detailed design, architecture, risk analysis, that all has to keep up, and that just takes time, and that naturally slows down teams. But you can't lose sight of the documentation in medical device, because as auditors will say, if it's not documented, you didn't do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's really touching the pain point, if you will. Maybe I'll ask that differently. First of all, let's say if you can describe what is the ISO 13485, and does the ISO describe how to manage the development lifecycle?
So yes and no. There's a quality management system that's globally recognized, or a set of standards called ISO 1345. I'm based in the United States, so we also have the FDA. And so in lockstep with 1345 is CFR 21.820, which talks about design controls. And really, I think design controls in the FDA world is the topmost regulation. But 1345 implements that. 1345, ISO 1345 is a quality management system that provides you guidance on how to document purchasing, how to document manufacturing, how to document design of your software, verification, validation, when you transfer it from design to manufacturing. So I think it's, as a software engineer, I didn't like process when I was young, but there's a reason why we need process. And this standard 1345, it's a globally recognized standard that, at least if I am compliant to it, an outside party will have some confidence that I meet a bare minimum of standards on how we run the company, how we document our processes and procedures, and how we design it. And so I think it's a very good standard, in that I think 95% of what the standard states is just good common managerial and engineering sense on how to document the design and testing of your product.
Okay, so on that point, I mean, are you concerned that perhaps it's a bit too generic? Like you say, it supports medical device manufacturers, repackagers, even distributors. So a company like yourself, that is a software as a medical device company, is it's a bit of a different animal. Did you find yourself applying somewhat strange requirements to meet the ISO?
So, and that's a great question, because your point is well taken, is that the standard isn't built for a software company, and we are a software company. It's built for a medical device company that produces mechanical designs, electrical designs, software designs, manufacturing processes, sterilization, the validation of your quality products, the tools you use in managing your quality system. So I think it is somewhat general, but it also has specificity to allow you to define your processes as you use them. It doesn't tell you, it tells you kind of what to do, but not how to do it. And so the what's are there. And then if you're a manufacturing company, we all need purchasing. We're a software company, so we don't have a lot of manufacturing, but we still have needs to validate our processes, such as if we do a backup and restore of our servers. That is, in essence, a manufacturing process, and we need to have separate validation that when we back up files, we were doing it correctly, and that we can retrieve them, and that we have at least a bare minimum requirements document to define that process, a test case to execute it, and then a report that documents that activity. That's all defined in 1345. If you need to validate a sterilization machine or a welder or a laser marker, all that guideline is there. So I think it's good in that it doesn't matter what segment of the medical device industry you're in. It gives confidence to management and to employees and to the outsiders that you're doing a good process. And more importantly, there's just value in documenting repeatable, scalable processes. So, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, the legacy I leave behind in the written word, somebody can come behind me and hopefully, keep the company going. And I'll add one more thing, is that 1345 is just a top level document. There's a handful of standards that are specific to software. ISO 63204 is one, 14971 is a risk standard. So those are all documents that apply to me specifically for software. There's other standards for electrical hardware and testing. So 1345 is just the top level umbrella, but you have all these other documents and standards and IC standards that are specific to the segments of your industry. Does that help?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, you're basically saying that if a company has a good risk assessment, that's good engineering, that's good quality assurance, then it's probably already aligned with the authors of the ISO and their intent.
I would agree with that, yes.
But still, the ISOs describe moving to production in details. I mean, what does it mean for a company like yours?
So, again, we're a software company, so we don't have traditional, manufacturing lines where we're developing a widget and we have manufacturing folks assembling parts and testing parts running through electrical test stations. But there is in concept, there's a manufacturing component to a software company, in that when we release software, it has to go through a process from the design transfer, going from design to manufacturing. It's not nearly, as intensive as a mechanical or electrical device, but it's there. And then, doing updates. So we're very rigorous on how we release updates to the field. That's considered, you could argue that that's a manufacturing design process. Labeling. When I use the word labeling, it's how we identify the software, track the software from lot numbers to version numbers. That's no different than a mechanical device. Obviously, we're pure software, but the analogy is the same, is that if I create a widget, either I track it through a lot number or a serial number, we have to do the same. We do either version controls, build releases. There's several ways that we can track, the software versions and the individual builds within a software.
But just for example, the issue that you described with releasing, I mean, would you agree that the regulation or the ISO are kind of statically thinking? I mean, if we want to use the cloud, if we want to use automation, we kind of need to think about risk in a more dynamic fashion, because the cloud is being updated constantly and we want those updates, and that Android phone is being updated constantly and we want those security patches. So how do you advise to look at that in the modern perspective?
That's great insight, and I actually have quite a bit of experience on dealing with that. And so in medical device, and that's the challenge we have, is back in the day, we used to have to write our own operating systems or buy one that we could get all the source code to. We used to design our own computers for physician programmers. That's just not practical today. And honestly, a commercial system will have thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of users on those systems. There is huge risk reduction in knowing that. But at the same time, in a previous life, I was in charge of a physician programmer, and we used a commercial handheld device. And it killed us on the product releases because the manufacturer of that device, as you know, phones, we get a new model of phone every 6 to 9 months. The operating system might be updated, once a month. The applications might be updated weekly or even quicker than that. And so on medical device, what we have to be very, very careful about is controlled release. We cannot release untested software. And so, like, for example, on the Galen platform, we have scheduled maintenance releases. We plan 3 a year because we're very rigorous and formal about that. And then we even give the option to the customer that they can skip a release if they choose. They have that decision. Now, we time limit it to a minimum, amount. They can't skip releases forever, because your point is that we have to apply security patches. But even applying security patches, we don't do it, ad hoc. We define it. We have a very discrete and formal process where we accept that security patch and push it out. And if it's an emergency patch, we will, do it out of cycle. But on handheld devices, and I encourage people to use them because it's cost effective. But it becomes an exponential problem, because say you have 3 devices, and then you have each device is different, then each operating system is different. And then if you're using browsers on those devices, they may be different. And so it becomes just a problem of numbers. And so, but you have to qualify each combination of OS, patches, browsers, and devices. And so we lock those down. If you can lock it down 100%, great. But and that's the risk, is how often do you update the software? You have to, you want to do it as quickly as possible within means and within reason. And it's not easy. It's a difficult problem. And on the cloud, we do the same thing. We control the releases. We just don't release new product every day, because you can't do that in medical device.
But would you advise maybe to look at it also from a different angle? Say, okay, I can't control the environment, so now how do I mitigate that risk? Maybe I add more feature that make sure that my communication is okay. What will happen if the communication is not okay? How can I notify the user that? So building more mechanism into the device that really are based on Android will be updated on a weekly basis, and that's fine.
And you need to take a risk approach. So if I'm doing a dosing calculator, and it's a fairly simple dosing calculator, say I'm prescribing a drug based on height, weight, and sex, and the risk of taking 2 pills as opposed to 3 pills won't kill you. You can take a risk approach where, look, if the risk is low, if it's a class 1 software that no matter how bad I might mess up or screw up on the software, I won't kill anybody, then yes. But if the risk is high, such as your programming software is changing the RPM of a heart pump, and if I get that wrong, I can kill the patient, then you need to be very, very careful on updating the software. And that's kind of why we built Galen, is that Galen was purpose built for the medical device industry. And so from the get-go, we put our procedures and processes in place, starting with ISO 1345 and the FDA design controls 820.30, and then all the requirements, standards below that, such as the medical device standards and risk standards and FDA guidance documents. Galen is purpose built to all those different standards. We have objective evidence, we have test protocols and matrices that show how we map all these different standards. And that's the balance, and that's why most medical devices haven't been connected to the internet, because of what you said. But it is that there is real risk, and you just can't change ad hoc, because if you don't have controlled change, in medical device, you can harm somebody. But at the same time, we need to take advantage of the technology, because I do believe wearable technology is coming more and more. What's also interesting is predictive health. So you have 10,000 pieces of patient data on the cloud. You want to use predictive analytics to diagnose health issues. Well, you haven't trained your AI. And so the FDA right now, and again, my bias is mostly the FDA, is the real power is using AI and trainable algorithm to go and detect health issues. But you have to prove that it works. And so I can't have a voice recognition program that works 80% of the time. My algorithm has to work 100% of the time in diagnosing those health issues. But it's really exciting because we're heading off in that direction. And as an engineer, we need to enable that technology, but we need to do it in a controlled fashion.
Right. I see the point. It's just the concern is that we might be holding innovation, if you know what I mean.
Right. And that was, so I'll tell you a little story about myself, is that I'm a little bit of a rebel, so I like to try to do things a little differently, or as an engineer, we always try to design that widget. When I was working for a company, we have to include regulatory and clinical when we make our design decisions, because there's impact to that. And I got to the point as an engineer where I was saying, no, you can't do this because of this regulation. No, you can't do that because of that regulation. And it actually bothered me so much, I actually made a change in my life and went more on the entrepreneurial world, where, there's a problem. Let's figure out how to solve it. Let's use our engineering skills. But we don't operate in a vacuum. We have to design good products. We have to design them in a regulated environment with regulatory and clinical helping us. And of course, you also have to design for manufacturing. But there is a balance. And, but I think we're at a new frontier where we have all this technology, and we can do real good in this world through, engineering and innovation.
So you kind of touched it before, but what I wanted to ask you is, can we make the quality management system more flexible, to support agile? Because in many organizations, it's kind of embedded in a linear model. You have to do one thing, and then there's the other, and that kind of constraint is challenging to do agile.
I agree, and we have tools now to help us with that. Jira is a great tool where we can. And still a lot of companies do this, but when you can afford tools, and I'll give you an example of a tool we use. We work with a company called Greenlight Guru. It's a quality management system, and their tools allow you to what I call atomically manage your requirements. And so no longer do I have to submit a 300-page requirements document to a antiquated paper doc control system. I can send out requirements and get them approved one at a time, and then I can build test cases that are electronically linked to those requirements, and then send the requirements out for approval. And the matrix that tracks all that gets automatically generated through the power of these tools. So yes, I think we can, and we are doing it. And plus, geographically dispersed. You and I are talking, halfway across the world. So you and I could sit down and collaborate on a requirements document, and I can send it to you for approval. You could reject it. Said, Chris, you screwed up here. You need to make this change. But very quickly, we can collaborate. And so these platforms, and I would highly encourage, I would never do a paper quality management system ever again. We abandoned that many, many years ago. But in your engineering tools, your risk analysis, you can tie your risk directly to your requirements and test cases. So to be that better, faster, cheaper, leverage these tools and be more efficient. And then you can send these requirements documents out for peer review, and then have those submitted to the FDA or whatever your regulatory body is. So yes, I would highly encourage folks out there to leverage tools such as Greenlight Guru or any type of these sophisticated development tools. Automated unit testing. Back in the day, we used to have to manually do unit testing. Now you can set up automated unit testing and run them every night, and there's huge value in that.
So that's really a good insight. And but I wanted to ask you on that is, do you find yourself doing artifacts on top of those tools, like exporting the test from Jira to a Word document and then loading the Word document to an electronic document system and having that? Yeah, you said like, I don't want to go back to those templates, but sometimes those quality management system, they are kind of paper on glass. It's like they took the template, they made it an electronic form, but still you have those Jira and testing tools, but all the artifacts that comes from those tools have to be exported to another tool, and that creates a big overhead, and it's kind of a waste.
I can tell that you have deep expertise in quality, because I love it. Paper on glass. I haven't heard that before, but you're absolutely right. And so, yeah, I'm dealing with a company that does exactly that. We have a program system where we electronically do requirements, but then we have to export those to a Word document, cut a PDF, and send it through a secondary documentation tool. But that's a legacy company that has partially adopted these tools. The new company, and again, I'm going back to Greenlight Guru. That's not true with Greenlight Guru. You can do everything electronically and submit your requirements through peer review, and then from that you automatically generate a document. So I see your point is that we're doing the same thing over and over and again, and it is wasted effort. Matter of fact, I was doing that this morning in a company I'm helping, and so. But at Galen, it's not a perfect world, but we try to eliminate those extra steps, and that's through the tools. That's the direction the industry is going on. So the quicker you can adopt these new tools, the more efficient. Because the FDA doesn't say you have to do that. The FDA says you have to have peer reviews. Doesn't matter if it's paper or electronic, and if you have 2 peer reviews using multiple systems, there's nothing wrong with that. It creates more work on your side, and I call it the overhead of bureaucracy, the bureaucracy of just pushing these documents through.
First of all, I love that the way you implemented it. It sounds really state of the art. And so maybe you describe those tools, those software that are for quality management software systems, and like those ERP tools and maybe the manufacturing automation tools. The ISO also required us to do something about them. Yes, to manage their life cycle. Maybe you can elaborate a bit about this and how to do it right?
Sure. So any tool I use that touches the quality management system, it has to go through a validation process. And so there's boundaries around that. But one I love to talk about is Excel spreadsheets. And this is so easy to get tripped up and caught on an audit. I've created this Excel spreadsheet. It automatically does standard deviations, control charts to track my widgets going down a manufacturing line. The auditor will say, did you validate that spreadsheet? No, I didn't. I'm just using it. No, you're using that Excel spreadsheet as a quality control tool. I need to see the validation, and you didn't do it, so you have a finding. We used to get an argument all the time that is email. Do you have to validate email? And usually we make a distinction that you can separate out the business tools such as email. If I'm using email to communicate with a quality rep, okay, we don't have to validate the email. But if I'm using accounting software to track invoices of my shipments, you better validate that because that is a quality process. Another tool, if you're using a doc control system, for example, if you're using Dropbox, can't use Dropbox if it's not validated, and there's security issues with Dropbox. It's a great tool. We use it, but we don't use it in our quality management system. We use it for other things. But if you do use Dropbox, how do I know that my 3 devices that are syncing between my desktop, my iPad, my iPhone, how do I know those documents are in sync? Unless you do have a requirements document and a validation protocol to ensure that, you don't. Electronic signature, 21 CFR 11. I need to have independence verification or validation that my electronic signature is working. And so the rule of thumb is be very careful of Excel spreadsheets. If you're using them in any way, we used to use them to back up our mathematical modeling of, for example, a battery end of life in a service. We used to have algorithms that would predict based on usage and load, when would the battery die? We better have those spreadsheets validated. If you're using it for quality control, spreadsheets they can get very, very complicated, and you can do very sophisticated math in some of these spreadsheets. So be careful there. But rule of thumb is any electronic system that touches your quality management system, you should have requirements, validation protocol, and a report validating that tool works as you use it. You don't have to validate the whole tool. You just have to validate the pieces you use and have documented evidence. Remember, if it's not documented, you didn't do it. Does that answer your question?
Yes. But would you agree that we have to use judgment, like really for calculations that are risky? Then yes, we validate that Excels, but like you said, things doesn't affect the quality or cannot affect the product, then we shouldn't go overboard. And there's not much use of me validating Outlook. Unless it's really I use it for release of batches, and then I just make sure that it works and it's being backed. And so really to use a risk-based approach, and because that can be very heavy on some organizations.
It can be. We used to argue, do I have to validate the pen I use to take notes during meetings? And we used to joke about that. But no, you said a key word, risk approach. If it's so low risk, then you need to spend your time and resources on the high risk items. And that's all judgment. It's judgment. But yes, definitely take a risk approach to your validation. I couldn't agree more.
I have a question. It's with respect to quality management system, but also in general. Many organizations are very risk adverse. And what would you advise to companies to concentrate more on the benefits of introducing new features or on avoiding the risk?
I love that question. Let's talk about why Galen exists, because in the past, medical device companies have avoided the risk of connectivity because they saw it risky. And I certainly understand that viewpoint, but we live in a connected world today. And so the reason Galen exists is that innovative companies, they demand connectivity to be competitive in a connected world. And so imagine that you're a parent or a loved one, and your child has some type of medical device, an insulin pump, and it discharges or it malfunctions or it gets low on drugs. Wouldn't you want to know that? That heart pump, a bearing has a catastrophic failure, or through sophisticated analytics, you can predict when you're going to have a bearing failure in a heart pump. I used to have to support device failures as an R&D engineer. We would have lead failures. We'd have electronic failures. There's something called fibrosis that would build up, and that would create so much impedance around our lead, we couldn't deliver electrical current. I wouldn't know about that for 6 months because our patients wouldn't go and see their doctor but once in 6 months. If that happens, the device stops providing therapy and the disease state returns. Wouldn't you want to know that as a doctor, as a patient, as a caregiver of a loved one, that your medical device isn't working anymore? So yes, there's risk in connectivity, but I think there's far greater risk in not having connectivity. And we all have check engine lights in our car. When that check engine light goes on, it tells us something's wrong with our car. That doesn't exist in medical device. There is no equivalent of a check engine light. So yes, there's risk, but I think there's far greater risk in not knowing the state of your medical device. And the world is changing. We live in a connected world. So to be competitive, I don't think it's a choice anymore. You have to have it. And then imagine once you get that data, you can run some sophisticated algorithms and do predictive health. Might find disease states that you would never find. So it's a great question. It's always a balance of risk reward, but to be competitive in a connected market, I think most companies will look at risk from a connectivity point of view and move off in that direction. It's a great question though, and there is no right or wrong answer on risk, but it's a competitive world. So when you can add features at a reasonable risk, then you should certainly do it.
Right, and there's never nothing in the regulation that shows that maybe the FDA think differently than what you say. That it feels like they are feeling the same way.
Actually, I would argue that there is something in the regulations, but it's different from what you might be thinking. Is that we have to do post-market surveillance on our devices. We have to track our devices. If there's a manufacturer, for example, when we became aware of a issue in the field, we would have to notify the physician or the patient about that issue. And so, yes, you're right that the FDA doesn't say you can't do it, but the FDA says you need to track your device. You need to do post-market surveillance. It's compliance. And so I think that if you look at some of the FDA regulations, they lean towards making it easier to track devices. You're in a clinical study. How do you know somebody's using your device? You don't sometimes. If you might not know for days, or you might never know. And so if there's a way that you could add features that complies with compliance, that supports clinical trials, that supports post-market surveillance, I think we're all winners by doing that. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Fantastic. Maybe to close, you can tell us a bit how to get more information or follow your publications?
Thank you for that. Yeah. My name's Chris Dupont. You can reach me at chris@galendata.com or hit our website, www.galendata.com, spelled GALENDATA, just like it sounds, galendata.com. And follow us on LinkedIn. We're doing a webinar. We're doing a webinar next week, Tuesday the 27th, on quality management systems. And so it's pretty timely. The next webinar will be about funding for early stage medical device companies. We've done webinars on analytics and everything. So please jump on our website or follow us on LinkedIn. It's the best way to track us.
Wonderful. Chris, thank you so much. Really, it was very generous of you.
My honor, and it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for making the time and allowing me to share some background on Galen with you.